this actually has been a report that's been in the works and being researched for almost 2 years or a little more than that. So the last couple of years, Hogan has been sharing bits and pieces of the model, has been honing that, also sharing some of that in academic conferences, collecting more data. So what you see in front of you today is in a way a culmination of several years of very focused research. And even before that, several years of reflection and thinking that Dr. Hogan has had in the area of leadership and leadership development. And for those of you who've been deep in using some of the Hogan assessments, you'll see some of the philosophies of leadership fundamentals that Hogan's been talking about reflected very much in this report and sort of coming together. So without much ado, I'm just going to jump right in. Most of you know who we are, but just a quick introduction. As Three Fish Consultants, we are really in the space of people and organization capability, which means we work in the space of talent assessment, executive coaching, leadership development, and really leverage the science of organizational psychology. Most of you know us really also as the master distributor for Hogan assessments. So what does it mean? What's our role as the master distributor? Fundamentally, we are responsible for growing the Hogan market in India. And how do we do that? A big part of that is we support our solution partners, resellers, independent consultants, and help them integrate the Hogan solutions as part of their own consulting practice. So that's a big part of what we do as the master distributors, and to that extent we run certification programs. We also do regular updation and skill building, also bring in updates on new products from Hogan. We work directly with our clients, so some of you who've joined us today, we end up working with you directly. And finally, and this is beginning to happen more now, as we're getting focused on also driving some India-focused research agenda. So we're beginning to look at some of the data we have, beginning to partner with Hogan Research to look at some India-specific leadership questions and personality questions. So stay tuned, more of that stuff will be coming through to your way. And as Ambika said, the vehicle we found useful in reaching out to all of you across India real quickly and easily is the webinar series that we continue to offer. So once again, welcome. Really glad to have you all with us today. Before we dive into the actual report, just a step back to take a look at this entire space of leadership assessment and development, whether it's succession planning, whether it's high potential development. I think all of us, or most of us, in some shape or form are engaged in this, either as internal consultants within the organization or as external consulting partners to the client organizations that we work with. And I'm sure all of us have experienced, especially in the last decade or so, that the responsibility for leadership development truly is beginning to move out of it being just an HR or human resource exercise to even boards getting pretty hands-on and pretty involved in looking at the top talent within the organization, also holding the CEO and the management teams accountable and responsible for how are they building leadership talent within the organization. So while that's true and that's the context within which we are operating, and to that extent we know that there's nothing new about high potentials. What I mean by that is, of course, companies have bet on their high potentials to drive forward with the growth. There have been processes used for identification of high potential talent, also focus on developing high potential talent. And yet, over and over, as we engage with our client organizations, and again, I'll see probably resonates with all of you who are within organizations, that many a times we feel that we're not getting the desired results. And so what's really at play over here? Sometimes it's the identification process itself, and sometimes that process itself is flawed, and it is not a perfect process, and we know that, and that is a known problem, and it's subject to error, whether it's error around politics, whether we like it or not, personal favoritism is at play, or sometimes it's just human judgment error, and where is the data, where is the science? So the errors of human judgment are also contributing to some of the flaws in the identification of high potentials. Even though we talk about it being identification of potential, as we know that all processes seem to still over-rely on past performance. So selection is still based on past performance. Again, nothing wrong with that. As we engage with clients, clients will say, isn't that a past, like an entry? And of course it is. It is about demonstrating consistent performance. But along with that, are we missing out people who perhaps are being overlooked by the system, who truly have the potential? Maybe these are the diamonds in the rough. How do we spot them? And I think that continues to be a question that vexes all of us. And answering that is important because we need to expand our talent pool. Another aspect about the identification process, and especially today, as more and more millennials are coming into the workplace, as some of the older workforce is retiring, is a question that's beginning to haunt leaders, beginning to keep HR leaders awake at night is, do we have a sufficiently prepared pipeline? Do we even have a strong enough pipeline? Are we even reaching out deep and broader into our organization to spot the talent that we can groom? And even if we identify them, what do we do with them? And a little bit you'll see me picking up on that theme. But let's stay a little bit still with the process of identification. As I was saying a minute ago, even though we're talking about potential, the truth is we over-rely on performance. And what happens with that is when you're grooming people to take on roles that are of significantly different scope, scale, and complexity, sometimes you begin to wonder whether past performance is in fact enough, or do we need to look at something else? But that's the million-dollar question, to say what is that something else? And it brings us right back again to the question, potential for what? Now coming back to Dr. Hogan's work on this, and again, many of you are familiar with it, we come out, or Dr. Hogan's come out and put a stake in the ground to say when we define leadership, when we define universals of leadership, we are really talking about the potential to lead and maintain a high-performing team. And so you'll see later on when we get into the Hogan High Potential Report, it's really anchored around this theoretical premise that it's, when we're talking about leadership, we're really talking about potential to maintain and lead a high-performing team. Now, as we're beginning to talk about performance, there's an interesting concept that's in the last 5-6 years that has emerged in academic research, which is around emergence and effectiveness. Which is the leaders who emerge as leaders in the organization, are they truly effective? And now by effectiveness, I mean, are they truly the leaders who can, who are basically leading and influencing and maintaining these high performance teams? So let's take a little bit of a closer look at this concept of emergence versus effectiveness and what does research tell us about it. Research tells us that leaders who are emergent versus leaders who are effective, they're actually spending their time very differently. Leaders who emerge, which means leaders who show up as leaders in organizations, are often the ones who are spending a lot of time managing up. They're very careful about the reputation that they're creating, and they're very conscious about the impact, and they're very conscious about the visibility that they're creating. Whereas leaders who get labeled as effective leaders are very good at managing down, which is they are busy down in the weeds, taking care of their team, helping the teams be successful. Now you'll say, how do we know that? Some of it is data that Hogan looked back, where they looked at about 21,000 managers with matched performance data and 360 feedback. And that's the data that went into building the High Potential Report. But some of this research also comes from independent academic researches that have been done, which also further go to say that there's actually only a 10% overlap between these two groups. Which means about 10% of leaders who are emerging as leaders and managing up are actually effective managers. On the one hand, that is a cause for concern, but on the other hand, I would say that's also an opportunity for development, because it's about giving feedback to these emergent leaders to say, hey, how about doing these few things so that you can start becoming more effective? It's also about coaching some of your effective leaders or effective managers who are not emerging to say, listen, it is important how you show up and the impact you're having. So feedback, coaching can all help us expand and strengthen this this leadership pipeline. And I'm going to repeat this theme again a little later because you'll see it coming out again when we talk about the HOGAN High Potential Model and how it's been set up, truly with this intent of being able to see these groups differently, but also being able to coach and develop these groups so that really we're able to cast a wider network and begin to fill up our leadership pipeline. Now, why is it important to fill the leadership pipeline? Because we know leadership matters, and we know that leadership drives organizational performance. Now, going back to some of Jim Collins's work on level 5 leadership, we know that he talks about persistence and humility as the two key attributes of leaders. Now, when you connect this back to emergence and effectiveness, what research has shown is most or typical high potential identification processes help us identify these emergent leaders, but the processes often end up overlooking the effective managers who perhaps are a little low-key or humble and hence not really showing up with that visibility. So one of the things you will see in the high potential model later on is that the HOGAN High Potential Model clearly calls out emergence and effectiveness and then is able to help us look at that and also help us look differentially at developing these talent pools. So which takes us right into, so we've got past, we've identified our high potentials. The question becomes, now what? What are we doing with the high potentials? Now going back again to leadership and some of the talent management research that's out there, we know that leadership failure still continues to be high, and some of Hogan's research shows that actually some of this failure base rate at leadership at senior levels is almost as high as 30 to 50%. Which brings us to saying, so what can we do to help leaders become more self-aware, become more strategically self-aware, and then also help them calibrate to what is it that's going to help them become more effective in the organizations that they're leading. The other thing that as we engage with clients, we've heard clients say that when we have identified the high potential talent, sometimes that ends up then creating a sense of entitlement. The group that has been identified ends up having also high expectations. Expectations in terms of the commitment to development that's going to come from the organization, for instance. And when those expectations are not met, and sometimes it does become difficult to scale the development processes, then that in fact leads to higher levels of attrition in the high potential talent. But development cannot be forced, and again going back at senior levels of leadership, we know that the biggest impetus for development really is creating that self-awareness. But self-awareness has two components, knowing what I'm good at, but then also knowing what is it that I should improve. And so when you look at the high potential report of Hogan, not only will it help you identify the strengths that your high potential talent brings, but it's also going to help based on some leadership universals, give some roadmap for people to begin to think about how can they be even more effective as leaders. Okay? So that's a little bit of the context in which we were operating as this leadership high potential development report was being built. So with that context in mind, the focus for developing the high potential report was really along these lines. How can we help our clients temper judgment? Because there's always going to be human judgment in identification of talent. But can we help temper that judgment with science? Can we provide a way in which we can level the playing field such that some of these non-emerging, highly effective talent in the organization can also get spotted? Is there a way to bring a solution that is globally applicable? Because more and more today, organizations, whether it's Indian organizations or multinational organizations, we're truly operating in a global arena, operating across multiple countries. So is there a solution that can be generalized across all these multiple countries and truly be a global solution? Can the solution help us prioritize behavioral change? So not only allowing a person to see what their strengths are, but helping them create a very targeted roadmap, which in turn not only can help the individual fill their and close their skill gaps, but really at an organizational level enable the organization to truly strengthen that leadership pipeline, to take that fiduciary responsibility very seriously and begin to fill up the pipeline to take on future challenges. So these were really the guiding principles or thoughts behind the report that came up. The report itself is very much anchored in the Hogan High Potential Model. Today we would like to say it's the industry's only theory-driven model. And what we mean by that is Hogan started with the question, what do we measure? Potential for what? And that's what I was saying earlier. It's ultimately potential to lead and maintain high-performing teams. How did we go about doing this? Definitely looking at data from about 21,000 managers, both in terms of the Hogan assessments, but match data in terms of performance as well as performance ratings. All of this led to emergence of what Hogan is beginning to call the universe of leadership development. Now, having said that, every organization will have their own unique ideal profile of a leader. So in no way are we saying that there is one ideal profile. But what we are saying is that there are some universals of leadership which should help guide some of our decisions around identification and development of high potential talent. Clearly, there is no one size that fits all solution. And when you look at the HYPO model and the report further on, you'll see how we are going to enable you to take a look at these universals, but then prioritize them depending on your own particular organization, your own industry, and also your own organization's needs. So let's get into what is the Hogan High Potential Model. The Hogan High Potential Model rests on three tenets or three principles. It talks about leadership foundations, it talks about leadership emergence, and it talks about leadership effectiveness. Leadership foundations is all about managing one's career and being a good organizational citizen. And the three competencies that really go into building leadership foundations are following process, thinking broadly, and getting along. People who demonstrate these competencies are likely to have a lot more stable, solid leadership foundations. They're likely to manage their careers better. They're also likely to be good organizational citizens that are advancing the agenda of the organization and helping the organization become successful. So leadership foundations consist of following process, thinking broadly, and getting along. Leadership emergence, which is what we've been talking about earlier, is purely getting noticed and being labeled as a leader. And as we all know, some people, some individuals stand out more than others. So it's all around who stands out, who's better at influencing, and who's good at building connections. So the three competencies under leadership emergence is standing out, influencing others, and building connections. Leadership effectiveness, on the other hand, is actually about getting the work done. So it's about maintaining and building and sustaining high-performing teams. So how do you guide teams to be productive and get the results that you want? So over here we look at competencies of leading the business, managing the resources, and leading people. Again, those of you who are familiar, and all of you are Hogan certified, what we go back to is the assessment still remains the three Hogan assessments. So we'll get to that in a minute. So the Hogan High Potential Report really is a solution that is aimed at developing a high potential talent base based on this three-part model. The report itself has been designed in a way that it can facilitate development, but that it can also help you identify high potential talent and begin to widen your cast a wider net so that you're able to sort of identify these diamonds in the rough. And thus, not only is the report for building individual capabilities, but truly we're beginning to look at it as a systemic solution, as a solution that brings the power in the hands of talent consultants within an organization to look at the organization and say, assess the strength of my leadership pipeline, and then do something systematically to start strengthening the pipeline. Okay. So as I was saying earlier, at the basis of it still remains the three Hogan assessments, the HPI, the MVPI, and the HDS. The HPI in terms of everyday strengths, the MVPI in terms of the drivers and motivators, and the HDS in terms of overuse strengths and how are they likely to get in the way. Here's a bit of a sneak peek inside the report. If some of you have already been to the microsite which got announced in the Hogan announcement, you might have had a chance to download the sample report and might have seen it. Here's a look inside the report. As you'll see, the report begins with a section summary. So it talks about the foundations, emergence, and effectiveness as the three concepts. It gives the competency areas in each of the three sections, and it talks about what does a low score mean and what does a high score mean. That's just a high-level summary. It then moves into highly nuanced individual-specific scores. And over here, you're going to see that actually Hogan is also giving you, like it has in some of our insights reports, for example, a low, below average, above average, and a high rating on each of the competencies. This is where we'll start building nuanced understanding for a high potential talent to benchmark themselves against what does it take, against these leadership universals that we've been talking about. So when you take a look at the leadership foundations, how many greens do I have? Do I have any yellows? Do I have any oranges? Do I have any reds? In terms of leadership emergence versus effectiveness, how am I doing in terms of my effectiveness against the benchmarks of leadership universals? Am I doing enough in terms of showing up and appearing leader-like, which is in terms of my leadership emergence? It allows them to quickly prioritize and say, these are your key strengths, leverage these strengths, but here are some opportunities, why don't you begin to focus in on that and say what needs to happen. The report itself gives very, very targeted development tips. As you will see, section by section, competency by competency, it's all there, where people are given development tips, and this is really anchored to their own particular score. So for example, in this report, you will see that following process is, it's an above average score, not a high score, and the two subscales of Hogan that we are really looking at over here are prudence and dutifulness. And there are some development tips that are there to say what might you do just to make sure that you are able to bolster your natural strengths and become even more effective. So highly nuanced with some very targeted development tips, which also makes this a very scalable process, because you can then decide how much developmental inputs do you want to bring over and above that. You can decide to bring in either real in-depth coaching, or you can keep it coaching light. You can process it at a group level, or you can do a one-on-one, or if we can do sort of these, one-on-one in-depth coaching engagements. But the development tips are there so that you're not leaving someone sort of high and dry. They're benchmarking themselves, but there is also support for them if they choose to convert this into a very targeted development plan for themselves. So real quick, what do we feel we want to try and accomplish using this high potential report? I think it should enable you to build a fairly solid foundation for leadership success, as I said, both in terms of assessment as well as development. For the investment that you make in this kind of an assessment, you would be able to run some meaningful analytics. Look at, do we have high emergence? Do we have high effectiveness? Do we need to bolster our foundations? So not only at an individual level, but really begin to look at data at an organizational level. Ultimately, rubber meets the road when it comes to individual development. And so with a benchmark report like this, it clearly challenges employees to say, where do they want to improve? How do they want to change? And as I was saying earlier, there is no one sort of size fits all. And so what we mean by customization is, if you go back again, I'm going to go back here, when you look at the foundations, the emergence, and the effectiveness, as you're looking at your client groups, so you can actually engage very meaningfully to start looking at this framework and say, perhaps I want foundation to be all green, but maybe in emergence I can live with a couple of yellows, and maybe in effectiveness I want them to be a few yellows, few greens. Maybe you can start prioritizing which one is most important. And so again, it takes you sort of 60 to 70% there, and then you can start customizing it to your own particular organizational requirements. And that's really what this next slide talks about is you do want to do a little bit of that consulting upfront with your client groups, internal or external. Clients will have their own leadership competencies, so start by mapping those competencies back to the Hogan leadership universals. Begin to prioritize either based on the industry or the organization or the maturity level of the organization, or just purely strategically where do you want to take the organization. So some degree of customization can flow from that and some prioritization. I want to go back a little bit to the high potential model. Now, because of the emergence and effectiveness, it actually sets itself up to a very nice 2x2. And most consultants, like us, we all love our 2x2 models, right? So here's your 2x2, your matrix. I'm going to take a minute to talk about that. So if you think about effectiveness, which is getting things done and leading and motivating team, and emergence, which is really showing up in a very leader-like way. If a person scores high on both emergence and effectiveness, then truly you're saying, and that's sort of that 10% population that I was talking to you about, that's your true high potential. But then you have your hidden gems that can be effective but are not emerging, and this is where coaching can help to expand the potential and hence expand your talent pool. And then where there is high emergence but not effectiveness, that's feedback and coaching again to say, while you're still showing up as a leader, here are some things that you might want to do so that you build followership. Because yes, you're emerging as a leader, but for a leader to be truly effective, you want to make sure that you've got the people following you. And so there's some coaching around that. So if you see, when you begin to use the Hogan High Potential Report, it allows you to look broadly at your talent and in a way begin to sort of strengthen and expand that talent pool that's available to you. And the third pivot, of course, is the foundations, which is to say that's fundamentals. And more than anything else, if the foundation themselves are weak, then perhaps the first prioritization in terms of development are going to be on just strengthening the foundation before you even begin to look at emergence or effectiveness. So with that background in mind, I'm going to just real quick have just a few more slides and then I will pause to take questions because I'm sure Ambika might be collecting some of them from you. But really how the solution works, the assessment is online, it's the same HPI, SDS, MBPI that we know. The online assessment leads to reports. The report themselves are priced at $20,500 per participant. There is a volume discount that's there from Hogan. So for about 200 plus reports, commitment and one-time purchase, there's almost about 30% discount, and this is all pricing that's come from Hogan. Along with that, Hogan, you have some implementation resources, again, whether you're internal consultant, external consultant. There's an overview deck that you can take from us. There are some white papers on the microsite. So the microsite is really good, which is just simple hoganhypo.com. But we can give you an overview deck. There are white papers on the microsite. Along with that, Hogan is in the process, or what's in the work is some facilitation resources. As I was saying earlier, you could run a group session, you could do some coaching. These are all resources that are being built, and again, please reach out to us, reach out to your Hogan consultant, people who you work with regularly to support you for Hogan, and we will make sure that these resources become available to you as and when they become available to us. But again, the idea is let's get the report in your hands, let's get you to start thinking about it for your organization, and then let's help you with some resources to support your implementation, right? So real quick, what do we think the impact would be with this kind of a solution? I think it should help really customize the priorities for behavioral change. It should aid the high potential talent and their managers to have some very meaningful conversations, because a report is a benchmark report. It tells you where you are, what are your natural strengths, but it also compares you against leadership universals, so you begin to think about how can I get more effective in a very, very concrete way. I think the high potential report puts in our hands a highly scalable solution for our high potentials. It's a highly scalable way to assess the leadership pipeline, but also fairly scalable way to just engage in development of the talent. As simple as putting this nuanced report in the hands of your high potential talent to really building many layered developmental interventions. It can be as simple as that. So the solution is there, or you can start making it more nuanced and a lot more customized. I think it will also help those of us engaged in making talent decisions. It'll help us make decisions in a more informed way. We hope that it will also help with retention. As we were saying earlier, once the high potential group has been identified, then clearly you're creating some expectations in their minds for development. So putting a solution like this, where they've gone through this assessment and they're able to see these benchmark reports, and then they get some support to start looking at honing their own developmental priorities, we hope that that should also facilitate a sense of retention. And I think more than anything else, I look at this solution as a scalable way for people to really expand and strengthen the leadership pipeline. Okay, my screen was frozen. So my last and final slide, some thoughts to leave with you. I think the Hogan High Potential Report is giving us a new and a different way to identify and develop our high potentials. First of all, it's giving us fairly specific areas for behavioral change, and they're tying it back to leadership universals based on leadership research as well as Hogan's own data-driven database research. Because these measures are reputational, I think it's a tool that's going to enable us to moderate some of these errors of judgment that often tend to create flaws in our high potential identification process. It's a global solution, and so it can be generalized across. The Hogan model today really is the only model that's emphasizing leadership effectiveness. If you look at leadership literature, it still continues to be predominantly talking about emerging and emergent leadership. But this model clearly calls out saying, yes, while emergence is important, we need to move past it to say who's going to be effective. And it's taking you back to theory and data to say, we believe these are some competencies, and we believe this is an assessment to say where you are. And we also believe that it's coachable, and if you focus your developmental efforts, you can certainly strengthen and become more effective as a leader. To that extent, it's going to help companies, help organizations, help individuals prioritize their development planning and development actions. And really the final thought, I really think it's a very scalable, easy to deploy, easy to use solution to assess, manage, develop, and strengthen the high potential talent. And more than anything else, I think I would encourage you to think about this solution really for its scalability to be able to manage high potential talent. And our team of 3Fish consultants are here to help you. Your own consultants with whom you work otherwise are there. Those of you who work with with your client groups, feel free to reach out to us. We are here to support you as you begin to use this report for solutioning with your clients. And with that, I'm going to pause. How are we doing on time, Ambika? We still have about 15 minutes for Q&A.
We definitely have 15 minutes. So in case there are any questions, you can send it either in the chat box or the question box. Okay, we have our first question.
Okay.
It's from Deepak Jayaraman. What are the limitations of the assessment?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, Deepak, but I'm going to answer it to say the report is validated, report can be used. let's just not force fit and say there is only one way to look at high potential talent. I would suggest looking at this report as an enabler to support existing high potential identification and development processes versus using it as a limiting factor. What I mean by that is the universals clearly benchmark and give us some directionality for where to target our development, but that does not need to be the only way. And similarly, when it comes to identification, it clearly gives us, based on research, a benchmark of high, moderate, low. But let that not be the only one, because there might be some other factors that could also come into play. But at least it gives us some very robust science-anchored way to look at our talent.
Okay. The second question is from Sushil. If I've already done the Hogan suite for an individual, can the same data be used to generate this report?
Sushil, I think the answer is yes, but we'll just double check with Hogan on that. I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but let us just double check on that for you.
Okay. The next question is from Sarah. Will we also receive the individual HPI, HDS, MVPI reports if we request for the hypo report?
Not with the hypo report, but there might be some bundled pricing that Hogan would offer. So we will just have to circle back to Hogan and get you that pricing. Because essentially, I think what I understand from you, Sarah, is I want to take a look at the subscales and the HPI scores, which, as you know, becomes an independent report. So you will need to actually buy another report, like a flash report. So we will go back to Hogan and see. There might be some bundled pricing around it, and we can get that information back to you.
Okay. The next question is, if 5 of my employees in a group go through the assessment, will I get how they compare against each other?
That's not part of the report right now. The reports are individual reports right now. I think there is a way to look at analysis. Again, let's check back with Hogan on that. My understanding is that I think it's just going to require, again, some special data pull, but a good question. We will circle back with you on that. As of now, the answer is no. The report itself does not provide comparative analysis. To that extent, it's very much aligned with how all Hogan reports are, which are very individual reports. You will need to export the data, so take the data from the report and put it into some kind of Excel to look at it on a comparative basis. We'll just go back and see if Hogan is able to do some of that data extraction and what that might cost.
Okay. The next question is from Deepak. Could it be used standalone without HPI, HDS, MVPI?
Yes. I hope what I mean by yes, it's a standalone report. The assessments will still be HPI, HDS, and MVPI. So people will take those 3 assessments, but you don't need to get the HPI, HDS, MVPI reports. This is absolutely meant to be a solution which is standalone.
All right. The next question is from Veda. Will you help us customize the report based on our organizational competency framework?
The report itself is not customizable. Again, as you know about Hogan reports, because they are anchored in so much data and science and validation, that we don't customize the reports. What we will help you do is take a look at your own competencies and have conversations around how they map back to the leadership universals that you see in the high potential report. Also help you drive a conversation internally in terms of prioritization around it, which is what I was saying earlier. For example, you might say, I need all greens for someone to be even considered as my high potential, but maybe I can live with a few yellows, or maybe even a red. Or you might say that actually a red in one of these is a no-no. So those are some calibrated conversations we can help you have. That's the degree of customization that we are saying we actually think you should do, so that you can begin to look at these universals, but then map them back to your organization.
Okay. The next question is from Gaurav. Since the measures are reputational and effectiveness is more about doing the right thing, what impact linkage can impression management have on the foundation effectiveness aspect of the report?
Impression management has more of an impact sometimes on the emergence also. But really the reputational measure, what you will still look at effectiveness to see is this person going to be more or less effective.
Okay. Another question from Nidhi. Can existing Hogan certified consultants debrief this report, or is additional training required to debrief it for clients? If yes, what are the modalities for the same?
So Nidhi, great question. As you saw, it's a fairly easy to read report. The idea behind this report was actually to digest the complexity and bring it in a fairly simplified format in the hand of the user and the consumer. So yes, absolutely existing Hogan certified people can use this to debrief the report. In fact, this report may not even, if it's being used standalone without the subscales and all, can actually be used by most HR practitioners without any significant investments in certification. At the most, what we will say is if you're working with your HR clients, HR business partners, run an orientation session so that they've had a chance to take a look at the report, ask some questions around it. So no additional certification is needed. I believe there is like an online 10-minute tutorial or video that Hogan is still putting together. As and when that information becomes available, we'll certainly pass that along to you. But again, my point is, or rather, it's been designed to be a fairly user-friendly report. Having the Hogan certification just will deepen our understanding, our ability to coach around it, but it can really be in the hands of even non-certified people.
Perfect. The next question is from Sulochana. Can we get the current scores mapped to foundation, emergence and effective scales?
I think this goes back to Sushil's question earlier, which is to say if someone's already taken the Hogan assessments, can we generate the reports from that? So again, my guess is 90% I think it can, but as I said, we're just going to double check and come back on that.
All right. The last question as of now is, would the old suite of lead reports, including HTS reports, be still available?
Absolutely. In fact, as you saw, the old lead reports, which we are now calling leadership forecast series of reports, have just undergone an aesthetic update. So they're looking and feeling different. You can go to the Three Fish website. You can download it from there under the new lead reports. So absolutely, that suite continues to be a suite that's used for coaching. It's a suite of reports that Hogan continues to invest in. So whereas those set of reports are highly nuanced and excellent for coaching and deep coaching, I would say look at the high potential report as a way to truly build a scalable solution for your client group from a high potential talent identification and development way, and also look at it as an easy solution to drive some very, very targeted focused development. But when you want to go deeper from a coaching perspective, you might still want to go and look at the lead reports or the flash report, or I think that's what, going back to Sarah's question earlier, is would there be some bundle pricing if we do the high potential and we want to get the data on the report. So again, that's something we'll check and get back to you on. But yes, the LFS are very much there.
Okay. Okay. Another question from Gayatri. Is there a separate website for this hypo report? Can I get a sample download from there?
So Gayatri, you can go to our website, threefish.in, and if you go to the Hogan section under reports, you will see that we've uploaded the new hypo report. You can take it from there. Or, as I was saying earlier, there is a microsite that Hogan has built, and you can go there, which is www.hoganhypo.com. So you can go either way. You can go to this microsite, or you can go to the threefish.in website and download the report from there. And of course, you can go to the Hogan Assessments website, and you'll see the new hypo report put over there as well.
Any other questions?
Nope.
No, it doesn't seem so. So with this, I'd like to close this webinar and thank you everybody for being patient and thank you for attending this webinar and we look forward to having you for the next one. Thank you everybody. Good day to you.
Thanks, Ambika. Thank you.